I continue my chronological and systematic commentary of the first preface to the Science of Logic. I will put the link in the description below, the structure of the video with the chronological links. I follow the order of the preface, and I recommend that if you are interested in this video, you should watch the first two videos, the systematic commentary. I'll put the link in the description below, and you can find the playlist Wissenschaft der Logik on this channel. So yeah, I comment this edition, Cambridge Hegel translations, because it's a preface and the language is not really that important. When the terms become technical, I will use the German version, but as of now, I can use the English translation. So, also, in the scientific realm, this ignoring of the universal change is gradually beginning to lose ground. So, there are two ways of looking at the science of logic: the historical context, the historical Hegel, one could say. And I made a video to explain the broad context and to simplify and to go to the point. In a historical perspective, the period between the publishing of Die Kritik der reinen Vernunft by Kant in 1781, the first edition, and the publication of the Science of Logic in 1812, so this period of broadly 30 years, there has been tremendous religious changes, spiritual changes in the Romantic movement, in the works of Fichte and Schelling, in especially the German spiritual development, the social circles of high intellectuals, aesthetic changes, the Romanticism precisely, political changes with the French Revolution, industrial changes with the English Revolution, but the effects were only starting to become noticeable. It was still minor, but industrial and economic changes. Of course, there had been the entire development of 18th century, the Age of Enlightenment, with the questioning and the adopting of traditional beliefs and church institutions and traditional knowledge, etc. And major epistemological changes, most notably with Kant, who tried to prove that the mind was limited and could not access the knowledge of the infinite or of God or of the absolute. And it was a major revolution in philosophy, which is still influential to this day, because Kant is still considered as to be the most influential, maybe, thinker of modernity, because he kind of put an end to metaphysics, although he tried to save metaphysics, but that's a complicated story. So Hegel, in a historical perspective, which I keep repeating is dubious, but let us assume that, yeah, he says that there is an ignorance of the major changes which have been occurring, and he was aware of the massive changes occurring in front of him, so to speak. And in the modern context, the reason why I am making videos about the science of logic is because we are living an age of major changes in all realms, all spheres of life: science, politics, aesthetics, spirituality. There are massive changes and evolutions, and I have just understood that in order to think these changes, one has to go back to a logical worldview and to structure and order the massive changes that we see occurring in our world. However, the period of fermentation that goes with the beginning of every new creation seems to be past. So there have been major periods of fermentation, of outburst of creativity and intellectual and artistic life in the history of Europe, most notably the Renaissance, the Romantic era, and today's world, what we see in the West with the development of the internet it enables people from all over the world, but I'm focusing here on the Western world, to express their ideas. And we see a tremendous outburst and flow of ideas, some borderly insane, but some relevant, and there are a new development of knowledge and an expression of doubts and hopes and questions and of all sorts. And this is an age of fermentation, as the translation says. So, yeah. The demand for the elaboration and cultivation of the material becomes at that point all the more pressing. There is a period in the formation of an epoch in which, just as in the formation of the individual, the foremost concern is the acquisition and reinforcement of the principle in its undeveloped intensity. But the higher demand is that such a principle should be made into science. So Hegel is kind of the boring guy who says, okay, now you've had fun, but it's time to become serious. And like I said, the development of the internet has seen an outburst, a flow, bursting forth of creative ideas and destructive ideas as well, in all spheres of life: politics, science, epistemology, religion, spirituality. And the need, what I have understood, is that I believe that I should try to put order and systematicity and coherence and rationality in this self-movement of spirit, because every individual thinking human is a mode of spirit, one could say, because through his thinking activity he manifests a certain aspect of the truth about spirit. So people all over the world are expressing themselves on the internet and in books, and etc. And my purpose is to order and systematize this expression of ideas, and to try to see the light in the midst of this apparently chaotic flow of ideas. And yeah, that's why I am making videos about logic. He says then, the science of logic that makes up metaphysics proper, or pure speculative philosophy. That's very important. Hegel says that since Kant, metaphysics and logic have become one, because, to simplify to the utmost, metaphysics traditionally has been the attempt to grasp the essence of things through a thinking activity. And Kant said that we cannot know how things are in themselves, what the structure, the essence, the concept, the nature of things are. We can only know our own mind. So we project onto things the structure of our own mind. That's what Kant says. So we have to study the inner workings of our own mind, not in a psychological, historical, empirical fashion, but in a transcendental fashion, namely how the mind, independently of the body, thinks. And so for Kant already, metaphysics, in his view, was the projection of the logical categories of our mind onto objects: the soul, God, the world, and things, so to speak. And Hegel is kind of in agreement with Kant in the sense that he says that logic and metaphysics are one, namely the thinking consideration of things. But the difference between Kant and Hegel is that Kant said we can only know our mind and the phenomena. We cannot know what things are in themselves, but only how they appear. And Hegel says the structure of the mind and the structure of being, of the external world, are identical, but they are in a process of self-differentiation and self-recognition. That's the difference. But for Hegel, metaphysics and logic have become one. So a metaphysician is, for Hegel, a logician. And when he talks about speculative philosophy, it means mystical philosophy. Speculation, for Hegel, is we are present in the world immediately. Through sense perception, we perceive objects immediately. They are directly in connection to us. We can see them, touch them, feel them. We have an immediate presence. Through the thinking activity, what is called reflection, we can divide the immediacy of being and produce an image, an intellectual image of objects, for instance, by considering the external environment as the manifestation of the laws of physics. We can transform the immediacy of our presence in the world into The idea that there are physical laws at work that we cannot see, we can only see their manifestation, the phenomena, but we can interpret the laws through mathematical determinations and yeah. But Hegel says this divide between the immediate presence of the world and the reflection, namely the transforming activity of the mind, is not satisfactory. We have to go beyond, not to regress back to immediacy, but to unite the immediate and the reflection, mediation, immediacy, and this unity of both is what Hegel calls speculation. So it's the unity of what is immediately present, what has been reflected upon, what has been divided, separated, distinguished by der Verstand, and what must be brought back together by the activity of reason. So it's a free movement process. Yeah. The fact that it was necessary to make a completely fresh start with this science, the nature itself of its subject matter. So Hegel believed, from a historical perspective, that one had to start all over again, to start from the ground up, with a reconsideration of logic and metaphysics itself, and what is the object of logic and of metaphysics. He will talk about that in the introduction, but he just had and I have the same feeling, so to speak, that in the midst of all the chaotic, apparently chaotic flow of information of all parts, the tremendous amount of information coming from everywhere, the development of ideas and political and religious movements all over the world, one has to step back and think just for a moment, to try to think. And that's what Hegel did from a historical perspective, which is dubious, but yeah, and that's what I am trying to do, and that's what I am going back to Hegel, because in the midst of all this flow of information, one has to think orderly with systematicity, order, clarity, and yeah. The essential point to be kept in mind is that an altogether new concept of scientific procedure is at work here. Yeah. So Hegel doesn't use the word epistemology, which is the theory of knowledge, but his ontology is epistemological because the self-movement of being produces its own theory of knowledge. That's developed in the Phenomenology des Geistes. So we do not find the word epistemology in Hegel, but there is an epistemology, namely a theory of knowledge. What is truth? How do we acquire knowledge? What is certainty? What is doubt? What is faith? What is knowledge? Etc., etc. So, also, to simplify, from a historical perspective, Kant wanted to save metaphysics from the attacks of the Enlightenment thinkers and the development of rationalistic science, Newtonian science. He wanted to preserve the knowledge of God and the soul. But in his attempt to save metaphysics, he kind of brought about the downfall of metaphysics. But Hegel is the one, from a historical perspective, who tried to revive metaphysics and to achieve metaphysics. So, yeah. Inasmuch as philosophy is to be science, it cannot borrow its method from a subordinate science, such as mathematics, any more than it can remain satisfied with categorical assurances of inner intuition or can make use of argumentation based on external reflection. That's a very important idea in Hegel, is that for him, philosophy, which in its purely abstract kind is speculative logic, cannot borrow the method of knowledge from any subordinate science like physics or mathematics. In the modern age, people believe that everything has to be grounded upon and founded upon mathematics because mathematical truth seems so self-evident and convincing, and they put everyone in agreement that economics, sociology, physics, chemistry have been founded upon mathematics and the mathematical method, and there has been epistemological debates. For instance, the Austrian School of Economics, the kind of libertarian in tune with the Mises Institute, they disagree with the idea that economics can be mathematically apprehended. They want to ground economics onto purely logical deduction. That's what partly Mises and Rothbard and Hans Hermann Hoppe have been doing. And the Austrian thinkers, they reject the purely quantitative, statistical, empirical view of the neoclassical branch of economics. So these are very important debates which have, it seems like boring, nonsensical debate of armchair thinkers, but it has real life consequences for the everyday person. So yeah, Hegel says that philosophy, and here he means speculative logic, must be the foundation of all derived sciences, what we call sciences, namely physics, chemistry, and mathematics itself. Because what is truth? What is a rigorous reasoning? What is a method? What does it mean to check or to verify? What is it to be true or doubtful or dubious? These kind of questions must be answered, given an answer by logic itself. So Hegel's logic is an attempt to found and to ground all other fields of knowledge, to define what truth is. And he criticizes somewhere else in his work Spinoza for using a mathematical geometric method to talk about speculative content, as he says, namely God and the divine. So Hegel criticizes Spinoza for having borrowed a method of deduction, of reasoning from a subordinate science, and he wants to subordinate mathematics and all other sciences eventually to logic itself. Okay. And then when he says about the categorical assurances of inner intuition, he refers to people who say, I know this to be true because God revealed to me, or because the inner spirit, or whatever. There are people like this today, and I myself have been guilty of such ideas. But when you have a revelation of a higher mode of existence, of a spiritual mode of being, you feel that you possess a higher truth. But Hegel says it has to be demonstrated, it has to be proven, so to speak. And when he mentions, that's very important in Hegel, argumentation based on external reflection, äußere Reflexion in German. When he talks about the external reflection, he means a thinking individual who judges by a thinking activity to sublate a singular determination under a universal determination, a singular individual who thinks about an object. This is external reflection for Hegel, because for Hegel it is the object which must think about itself. So when you say something is this way or that way, for Hegel, that's an external reflection. It has to be yourself who say to yourself, I am this or that. That's very important, because he keeps referring to this external reflection. I will take the German translation, because in German it's even clearer. It took me a very long time to understand what Hegel meant. The sentence in German is so wenig als es bei kategorischen Versicherungen innerer Anschauung bewenden lassen oder sich des Raisonnements aus Gründen der äußeren Reflexion bedienen. Es kann nur die Natur des Inhalts sein, welche sich im wissenschaftlichen Erkennen bewegt, welche seine Bestimmung selbst erst setzt und erzeugt, which means, in English, on the contrary, it can only be the nature of the content which is responsible for movement in scientific knowledge, for it is the content's own reflection, so it's not an external reflection, it's self-reflection, that first posits and generates what that content is. That's very important. I keep insisting upon that, because for Hegel, the content, die Sache Selbst, the thing itself, there are different kind of things in Hegel. There is etwas, which means something. There is das Ding, which means the thing with its properties. And there is die Sache selbst, which is also the thing, but we have 3 words in German. Something, thing, and in English there are only 2 words. So yeah, he says that die Sache selbst, the content, Inhalt, is being itself, and it's a self-moving process, a self-initiating, a self-creating in a way, a self-determining process. And here we have the idea that freedom is not, or liberty is not the absence of determination. This is impossible, that would be pure being. But to be free, to act freely, is to self-determine, to set your own determinations within reality through an act of the will. That's what the libertarians fight for. In a way, they want to be self-governing, and to be self-governed is not to have no laws or no rules, is to set your own rules, self-determination. That's the principle of nationalism, that an ethnic people, an ethnic entity should be able to self-govern and self-determine, and that's what the libertarians in the realm of economics and politics fight for in a way. And Hegel says that being is a self-determining process. And I will illustrate this. I have already used this example in previous video, but I use it again. If an external agent, an individual, says the people of Poland or of Lithuania or Moldavia or whatever are white, it is true. The Poles and the Lithuanians and the Moldavians are white Europeans. They are European Caucasoids, and they are white. They are what anthropologists call European Caucasoid. But if I say this, it's an external reflection, because I predicate a universal determination onto a group of people, but it is not this group of people who self-determine, because I guess that most people in Poland or Lithuania, they know that they are white when they look at themselves in the mirror and when they see one another, but they have no real consciousness of being white, because in these countries there are almost no non-whites. They are only whites, so it's so self-evident that they don't think about this. But in the United States of America, for instance, where there are Hispanics, blacks, Native Indians, Asians, and whites, the white consciousness is much more prevalent. And the same goes in Brazil and in South Africa, where there are various races and diverse ethnic groups living on the same geographic area. The consciousness of the other, in terms of skin color here, or racial determinations, is much stronger, and therefore the consciousness of the self is stronger as well. I think that, I guess that most whites in South Africa have an awareness that they are white, whereas most whites in Poland or Lithuania or wherever, where there are only whites, or Iceland, they do not necessarily think of themselves as whites, because they are not confronted by difference and an other. And white consciousness, it is one thought determination to say these people are white, but it's another, it's a Hegelian determination, the development, for instance, of white nationalism. This is these are whites who are politically engaged, who self-predicate their white identity. The white nationalist movement in the United States, but in the whole world, is the self-determining process of the white race, which becomes conscious of itself as a race. And this is a Hegelian process. This is the difference between the external reflection, as Hegel says, and the self-determining process. And Hegel says that only the being which predicates its own determinations is the real method of knowledge, so to speak. So that's an illustration, and that's why one could say, the language here cannot be dubious, but the idea is that only white nationalists are real white, Hegelian whites, in the sense that they are aware that they are whites, and those who are not aware that they are whites are not real whites, so to speak. There's the distinction is kind of not clear, because but there's this idea that you are what you are conscious of being. This is Hegel's philosophy simplified. So that's what I could say. I will stop there for now. The preface of the first edition is not yet completed, so I will make another video in which I will comment the rest of the preface.